Aloha, I'm Kanoa Leahy, and welcome to Ka Pewa by Hawaiʻi Community Foundation. Our goal is to establish constructive discourse around some of the primary issues and challenges that face the state of Hawaii, and we do so by talking with community leaders and experts in those particular fields. Today, we focus on the housing crisis on the island of Maui. All right, we're here with Sterling Higa, co-founder of Housing Hawaii's Future. Now, it is a nonprofit movement creating opportunities for Hawaii's next generation by ending the workforce housing shortage. Sterling, thanks for being on Ka Pewa.
Thank you for having me.
This has been something that in your adult life you have championed, the cause of housing in Hawaii. What drew you to this issue?
My wife and I are millennials, and we have 4 children. When we look forward to whether they can call Hawaii home, I'm concerned. I worry that with the current trends, our children, our grandchildren won't be able to call Hawaii home. So for me, fighting for affordable housing means fighting so our children and grandchildren can afford to stay.
You hear the term housing crisis thrown out there a lot. We used it as the introduction to this episode, as a matter of fact. And it sometimes perhaps can come off as hyperbolic. But you feel like the term crisis does, in fact, appropriately apply here.
We have tens of thousands of people leaving the state every year, and the people that remain are struggling. About 10% of the population lives in poverty, and another 33% are one car accident, one job loss away from poverty. And the single greatest expense for all of these families is housing. Now, even if you're not one accident away from poverty, middle-class families feel that struggle where they wonder whether they'll be able to afford their bills or help their children with their education. And the struggle that people feel is what's driving people to leave our state.
Yeah, which leads us to the issue of population loss. Now, could you explain to us what that is and how that impacts the community here in Hawaii?
You're a sports announcer, so imagine if every year an Aloha Stadium full of people was leaving the state. That happened. Each year for the last 8 years. Between 30 and 50,000 people are leaving the state. Now, you see a number every year that says, oh, only 10,000 people left, but that's the net because tens of thousands leave and tens of thousands come, but we're still losing people every year. Each one of those people was part of a web, a community fabric, right? They had relationships, they had jobs, they contributed to this community, and now they're gone, and we miss them as they leave. And my concern is we won't have all of the people we need that help Hawaii run, from nurses that care for sick people to teachers that help our children, people that volunteer in the community, even our kupuna who have a well of mo'olelo, of stories, of knowledge from their lives. When they leave, they take all of that with them.
We are focusing on Maui here specifically, and certainly an issue that was exacerbated by the wildfires in Lahaina in August of 2023. You are also an advisory council member for House Maui, an initiative to address the housing crisis on the island of Maui. What do you see as the focus of House Maui and how it could positively impact the community?
House Maui is about bringing stakeholders together to address the things that are keeping housing unaffordable on Maui. And I think there are 3 things House Maui can focus on that are important. First is zoning. So there are these laws, zoning codes, that govern what you can build and where. And unfortunately in Hawaii, we have laws that make it really difficult to build truly affordable housing. We have what's called restrictive zoning, and changing zoning is a big part of what House Maui can do. Second is we need infrastructure. So to get to your house, you drive on a road. If you flush the toilet, that's going down a sewer line. If you turn on the water to drink, you need water. If you turn on the lights, you need electricity. All the infrastructure that allows us to support housing requires substantial public investment. And if we don't invest in infrastructure, in water, wastewater, electrical capacity, roads, we're not going to be able to build housing that supports our families. So focusing on infrastructure is important. And the last thing House Maui can do is really rally the community to support housing, because sometimes we have people that don't want to build new housing. They're happy with what they have. They don't want anything more to be built. We have to have forces that can come through and support building housing for our local workforce.
Yeah, because Maui voters have cited affordability in housing as the number one issue, and this has gone on for years, even before the wildfires in Lahaina. And so when there is that recognition of the issue and you have the community behind it sort of demanding for something to be done, what can be done? What can they look ahead to?
One of the big reforms for zoning is called Title 19. Basically, there's a zoning code. It governs what you can build and where. And Maui County zoning code was established back in 1961. It hasn't really been updated since then. And so it's actually due every 10 years for a refresh. So we're about 53 years overdue to refresh this zoning code. Fortunately, the County of Maui is in the process of revising it. But eventually, they're going to prepare a draft code that will have to be passed by the County Council and the planning commissions. And so everybody on Maui can get ready for that zoning code revision and create a zoning code that will allow us to build affordable housing, especially our missing middle housing.
It seems like the idea, the concept of affordable housing is one that everyone can get behind universally. But it seems like it's also much easier said than done. What are some of the primary obstacles that stand in the way of seeing more affordable housing projects being put into operation?
I'll talk about two. One is single family zoning. So we have a zoning code on Maui that makes it very easy to build a single home on a lot, and maybe you can build one accessory dwelling unit. A simple change that would allow for more housing to be built would be to allow for 2 or even 3 accessory dwelling units on residential lots. That allows a family to build a unit for auntie or for grandma or for another family that wants to work there so that they can have a place to call home. That's a very simple change, and it's moving away from single family zoning toward more dense missing middle housing. A second big thing is mixed use zoning. So on Maui, there's a separation of uses. We put houses over here, residences, and we put commercial uses, businesses over here, and you have to get in your car and drive. It's really hard to get around Maui without a car. A simple solution is to build these classic towns that we have on Maui. If you go to Makawao or Paia, or you go to Lahaina before the fire, or Lanai City or Wailuku, what you're seeing is a town that was built before we started separating residences from businesses. And these are the charming, wonderful places where it's cool to walk around. We can build like that again. We can build sort of town cores where you have businesses, you have that work, live, play combination that people love.
What gives you hope? What gives you hope that this is an issue? You've been banging on this drum for some time, Sterling. What gives you hope that this is a challenge that can be overcome?
Co-founding Housing Hawaii's Future, I've met literally thousands of young people, millennials, Gen Z, even Gen Alpha, young people, leaders who care about Hawaii and are concerned about its future and want to get involved in the civic process. We often dismiss young people and say, oh, they're tuned out or they don't care. But in my experience, that's not true. Most young people I meet want to get involved. They just want to know how. So what we try to do is to bridge that gap for them and show them how to get involved. But the thing that I've seen is once you bridge that gap for them, they get involved. I've seen young people join neighborhood boards. I've seen young people show up to testify at county council meetings or state legislative meetings. And I've seen young people even get on boards and commissions and serve their community in a volunteer capacity. All of that stemming from their desire to call Hawaii home and to make it a better place for their family, for their children. And when you see young people like that every day, it's hard not to be inspired. You know, I think it'd be a crazy person who could see what I see and not be inspired by that.
As the co-founder for Housing Hawaii's Future, you look ahead, 2025 is upon us. What are the priorities for you and your organization here this year?
We are part of a broader coalition that are looking at 2 big issues this legislative session. The first is what's called deed-restricted housing, but a better term for it is locals only or kama'aina housing. The question is, how do you build housing that's set aside for local working families rather than international investors or foreign buyers? And the answer is by creating deed-restricted housing. So there are a couple of proposals at the legislature that would make it easier to set aside some of the housing so that only families that are working here can qualify to live in it. And I think that's a big direction for the state and the counties to move in. A second direction is more transit-oriented development. Now, this fancy terms, right? Basically, it just means building those wonderful walkable cities that we love, places where people can live, work, and play, get around without having to get into a car. And so that requires infrastructure investment. It means investing in water and sewer and electrical capacity in roads and public transit systems. It also means making sure that we have zoned these areas so that we can build the kind of mixed-use developments that we want.
You mentioned deed-restrictive housing. No doubt there will be some form of resistance against that kind of legislation. But for people who are watching this, who are interested in getting involved, perhaps adding their name to the long list of people who would like to see that kind of change to make purchasing a house more of a reality for people who grew up here and go back generations here in the islands, where can they do that? Where can they learn more? How can they get involved?
The easiest way to get involved with these legislative initiatives is to go to staymovement.org. You can sign the Stay Movement Pledge. That gets you on our email list from Housing Hawaii's Future. We only send out important updates about ways people can get involved and important legislation.
You've mentioned a few times the younger generation and the involvement and the activity of the younger generation. Why is it important for that to be heard by some of those who are part of what could be described as the younger generation?
About half our state's population are over the age of 40, and about half are under the age of 40. If you go to any government meeting, it's typically the people over the age of 40 that are represented there. And sometimes they grow out of touch. They just don't understand the issues that younger people are facing. So a single person under the age of 40 who shows up and says, hey, here's how this issue is affecting me, here's my perspective on what we should do, oftentimes I've seen it completely change a room, because the difference between 1 and 0 is a lot. And the number of people under the age of 40 in most of these rooms where the decisions are made is 0. I'm 33. In a lot of the rooms that I show up in, I'm the youngest person by 15, 20, 25 years when talking about housing. And that's terrifying, because there should be more young people involved in decision making. So our hope is that young people will take up that mantle of civic engagement and help make these important decisions, especially about housing.
In your experience, how has the view of this issue changed from what can be described as, the generation of yore and what is now being faced by many who are under the age of 40?
One thing is, the American dream is not the same for young people. Young people may not want to live in a giant house in the suburbs, giant lawn to maintain, and have to drive an hour to and from work each day. I know a lot of young people who would prefer to live in a modest apartment in town without a car, be able to walk or bike or commute to work without having to spend an hour in traffic each way. And that shift in preferences is well documented on a national level. Younger people don't want that traditional suburban lifestyle as much as their parents or grandparents want.
All right, well, we are about to wrap up here for this episode of the podcast, but I do want to give you the floor. Anything that hasn't been touched on, anything that you feel is important to the message that you want to get out there?
I think it's important to maintain a sense of hope. Oftentimes, if you just read the news, it's usually bad news. They say if it bleeds, it leads. And so journalists are always looking for bad news. They're always looking for gotcha moments. What we should try to do as citizens is, when we see a public servant or even just a volunteer in our community doing something good, we have to call that out and congratulate them and encourage them. Most public servants, most people in government, all they receive on a daily basis is criticism. And so one of the things that I'm trying to be more mindful of is, when you see somebody doing something good, say something, let them know. Sometimes that'll be the only positive comment they receive in the week. So my hope is more people will get involved in housing, that we'll celebrate the victories that we've had, and that we'll have more as we move into the future.
Sterling Higa, mahalo for being on Ka Pewa.
Thank you, Kanoa.